Psychoanalysis and philosophy, non-human attachment. Attachment is one of the central concepts in psychoanalysis and in psychotherapy in general. Ever since Bowlby brought it to the center stage, and later evolutionary psychologists added strength by their findings, attachment has become one of the central concepts in psychotherapy. Lack of early life good attachment is something that we see in a wide range of pathology. In fact, some will say in most pathology. Inability to create what I call a healthy attachment portfolio. Just as we manage a stock market portfolio, investment portfolio, we have to manage an attachment portfolio where we have different types of attachment of different intensities at different points in our life. If the attachment portfolio is too thinly populated, or population is adequate but intensity is not adequate, in either of the situation, we see difficulties of anxiety, sadness, lack of motivation, absence of feeling happy and enterprising in life. And on the more serious end of the spectrum, we enter into DSM diagnosed pathology, some of them very serious. So management of a healthy attachment portfolio, what I call attachment portfolio management, APM, is at the center of one's well-being and mental health. This takes us to the centrality of attachment per se. And once we see attachment in front of us as the centerpiece of what we are considering, the natural question comes up: is attachment only human, or can human beings have non-human attachments? And this opens up a area which has not been adequately studied or given importance to, the area of non-human attachment. We propose to say something about this area, and I'm sure those who get interested will pursue it further. To my mind, this area is very important, especially today when human beings find it increasingly difficult to attach to other human beings. People find it easier to raise 3 children of cats than to raise one child of one's own. And in this kind of a social situation where lack of object relations, lack of stable attachments, lack of safe attachments are leading to almost a psychological pandemic of a global scale, it is very important to explore and develop this area of non-human attachments. How can we understand and optimize this area even as we optimize the area of human attachments? My personal opinion is that both human attachments and non-human attachments put together have to be optimized to really create an optimum portfolio of attachments. So let's open up this area. Let's start with just reminding ourselves of non-human attachments that human beings can have. To start off the discussion, human beings have the capability not only to attach to other human beings but also to attach to non-human entities, be it animals, we see it in pets, trees, we see people strongly attached to trees, attachment to nature. Some people feel out of place if they go out of nature and they rush back to nature at the first opportunity. Home, where we live, we get attached to the walls of the home. The walls are almost loaded with memories. Some of them real, some of them constructed. Same is true of hostels. When we go to the hostel for studies, we curse the hostel because we are leaving our homes for the first time. But when the course is over and we have to go back, we are in tears. We don't actually want to leave the hostel. So we get attached to the hostels. Most of us are attached very strongly to our schools, our colleges. Some are attached to mountains. Believers are strongly attached to gods. In more natural cultures like India and South America and some parts of Africa, human beings can also be attached to mythological personalities. And there is this whole world of non-human relating. So if we open up this whole world of non-human relating, it is relating to all the above 10 and maybe some more that I have not listed out. But there is this whole world that opens up when we try to figure out the world of non-human attachments that human beings have. Why has this not come to the center stage? Let's go back to the basics. The basics about the human mind are: first, human mind is capable of thinking and feeling. Two, the human mind is relational. It wants to relate to others. It's not a lonely mind. It's not a loner's mind. It's a mind of a relating entity. We are essentially a herd species, and our minds, therefore, are relating minds. Our minds also are predominantly species oriented. We think more about what other human beings of the same species think or feel or are likely to do or have done rather than what some other animal or tree is going to do. So the human mind essentially is a species oriented mind. So one, it is relational, two, it is species oriented, and within the species, it's highly competitive. It's also collaborative, it's also giving, but it's more competitive than collaborative and giving. In evolutionary terms, it's easy to understand because human beings can master other species easily, defend themselves from other species easily, but it's not so easy to defend oneself from uh, members of one's own species, because we don't belong to a species that does not harm its own members. We belong to an extremely cannibalistic species. Cannibalistic, of course, from a in a non-literal sense, but highly cannibalistic species. One of the reasons being that because human mind is essentially focused on other members of the species, the difficult emotions also go on to other members of the species. So it's not only fear, it's also the direction of our emotions, that we don't put our difficult emotions on other species, but on more, rather largely, even completely on members of our own species. If we could put our aggression, sadism, and domination on some other species, we would not be having world wars. So, for survival, given our characteristic of our mind, and apart from survival, the question of victory and loss, profit and loss, victory and defeat, profit and loss, all of that puts us invest more in human beings. And therefore, it becomes natural to have human attachments and human revulsions, likes and dislikes among human beings, very intense compared to non-human objects. But this has not been an exclusive area of human psychic operations. Except for the modern era, where man is cut off from nature, out into artificially created cities, cluttered together in concrete cubicles. This is where we see the non-human attachment has fallen to an all-time low. If we go into the entire era of human history before modernity, non-human attachments were quite substantial components of any individual's attachment basket. And it's a kind of a developing tragedy of attachment that human beings in the modern era lost the capability of non-human attachment, and towards the end of modernity right now, we have lost the capability, or we are fast losing the capability even of human attachments. So this trend of a deprivation of attachments, or rather a attachment famine, which has been going on for the last 250 years and is reaching a peak now. It will reach a peak around 2035, 32, 35. My personal opinion is about the end of modernity. My belief is 2032. Around 2035, we'll see the peak of the avoidance of human attachments. It has already peaked in certain countries, but it's not as it is still going upwards. We'll see peaks in most of the countries, developed countries at least, by 2035. So what we see in our lifetime, that human beings don't have much non-human attachments, and they also have very less of human attachment. This is actually a, a very temporal historical phenomena. Because we are surrounded by it, we feel it's always been like this, but that's not true. If we go to tribal cultures, if we go to ancient cultures, attaching to having non-human attachments as a substantial part of one's attachment portfolio is quite natural and normal. It is this wave of modernity which has implicitly circulated a belief that non-human attachments are unnatural, and with that they have cancelled the natural, organic, synthetic movement of human emotions to non-human objects, and they have put up something which is only human, and only something which comes from laboratory culture is legitimate, and everything else is not legitimate. So that has to do more with the limitations of modernity rather than something being an absolute truth. It is modernity which also labels non-human attachments implicitly, not explicitly, as something tribal, almost psychotic, unnatural, when in fact it was very natural for all cultures before modernity. And in fact, it is modernity which is uh, deficient rather than the concept of non-human attachment. It's only in recent times that we have started seeing modernity as a cultural and historical phenomena and not something which is an end state, ideal and eternal forever to be maintained. We now see modernity as a phase in human history rather than an end destination state to which we have reached and we have to maintain forever hereafter. And obviously, that is because of the limitations of modernity, which is leading to the closure of modernity. Those who are interested can see our discussion on closure of modernity. How do we find non-human attachments in ancient cultures? In shamanism, in Africa and South America, in some other places also, it's very respectable. Attaching to non-human objects is very respectable, not only natural but respectable. The most respected among the tribal members have possibly the strongest of non-human attachments. There is a terrible interest, a deep interest, and a community-wide interest in the world of non-human beings, non-human spirits. Interest in spirits, interest in relating to plants, interest in relating to deities, to nature, to souls. All of these constitute the portfolio of non-human attachments in the tribal, natural communities, most of whom have some form of shamanism. Back to India, in the Hindu culture, the non-human attachments are very strong. In fact, many people have almost comparable intensity of human attachment and non-human attachment. Those who have taken sannyas or who are renunciates, they actually have far more non-human attachments than human attachments. So in Hindu culture, it's quite natural. Attachment to gods, attachment to nature, attachment to mythological figures, uh, attachment to animals and birds who are seen as divine vehicles of divine deities, and attachment to spirits. These are quite acceptable in the Hindu culture. The moment you bring in the element of soul and the element of soul going into different types of incarnations and the reincarnation, the non-human attachment takes a very different form altogether. Because then you are talking about the soul possibly coming into a cat and cat coming back into your house, which means some dead relative is coming back into your house. And that creates a very different kind of a non-human attachment. It's like the human attachment and non-human attachment get fused together in that kind of relating. Where do we see non-human attachments on an everyday basis uh, in today's world? Wokism, I classify as a psychological disease. My feeling is DSM has to be modified to include woke personality disorder and woke psychosis. But one good thing that it has done is to normalize non-human attachments. To whatever extent it has succeeded, it has pushed the envelopes tightly in normalizing the non-human attachment. Pet relating is very normalized today after a long time, because before the modern era, the pet relating was quite natural and common. It was in modern era that it was seen as a aberration, as an exception. And this pet relating is becoming very common because of universal disappointment that we all feel in relating to other people. And once there is a universal disappointment, you don't know what to do with your attachment, so you try to invest it into non-human entities. We can see this in countries where loneliness has become the most widespread psychological pandemic. It's not even an epidemic, it's a pandemic, where countries have to appoint ministers for loneliness. We see that in UK, we see that in Japan, and there seems to be no cure to this difficult component of the spirit of the age. And the reason of loneliness is a universal disappointment with everyone, given everyone has so many flaws and unbearable flaws. So this also leads us to the significance of non-human attachments in our life and the necessity of it for our mental health, not only at an individual level, but even on the social level, at a public policy, public health level. Those pursuing the path of spirituality, we see them strongly attached to spiritual entities. We see how people fight over things and refuse to share or snatch back what they think is theirs. We see the attachment to things. That is very common, attachment to things, at times more than the attachment to people. Attachment to a place where one is not able to move out of a place, although inconvenient. Attachment to an evening place where people gather together. Many people have this attachment, almost an addiction, where they have to go to some place in the evening. It can be a meeting place, it can even be a club. And the attachment is so strong, it's almost like part of me is there. Those who are interested can see our discussion, I thrown everywhere. Separation from a city can create an attachment crisis. One of the reasons is it can be the first long-term safe attachment one has had if the attachment to the parents was not a safe and strong attachment, or even if strong, not a safe attachment. One of the aspects of non-human attachment is this: it's very necessary to have a closure for non-human attachments, especially of childhood. Like if you have lived in a society and after 30 years you go back there and you see the society being demolished and a new thing coming up. When you see it being demolished, it's very tragic. When the new thing comes up, you finally feel it's all over. Till it is there, it's very difficult to have closure. You can have partial closure, but the full closure happens when you see it being replaced by something else and you have adequately being with it when it was there. And that closure is emotionally very important, especially for those who did not have a safe or strong or good attachment with parents and caregivers, and who had thrown much of their attachment outside into the place. Because they are emotional more about that thing than any person. One of the very important dramatic examples of this is In India, it's quite common for especially those who come from villages to the cities to go back to the villages when the time comes to die. When someone gets old and sick, most of them want to go back to the village they were born. They spend their childhood, and it's a different kind of a closure that they want. And it's very common. It's almost like a tradition that people go back to their village to die. So these are some of the non-human attachment manifestations we see in our everyday life. Where do we find the aspect of non-human attachments in psychotherapy? Often we find it in what we call the tragic holding state, that one is attached to a state of affairs which is tragic, but with which one feels some safety that have survived with this tragedy for some time, and one does not want to give it up. So it is a psychological tragic state where there is tragedy, but one has lived in that state for a very long time. And one feels that if I have survived for so long, I will survive for an equal amount of years henceforth. And therefore, compared to the fear of the catastrophic fear of the unknown, this is a safer bet, even if it is tragic. And one refuses to move from a tragic state of affairs to a happy state of affairs. So, one of the reasons for what I call attachment to the tragic holding state, not the reason, but the attachment to the tragic holding state is an example of one of the non-human attachments. Collection of things that obsessive people do. They are attached to things. Fetishes of those with sexual perversions. Those who have extreme separation problems from the city or from a job. Those who are addicted to substances. They also have very strong non-human attachment to the substance. It's almost like in many of these cases, a secret human relation is lived out on the surface by a non-human relation. In phobia, we see the negative aspect of it. In addiction, we see a hyper positive aspect of it. In phobia, we see a negative aspect of it. A fear often of a non-human object. The reverse of what we are talking about. The attachment to transitional objects that Winnicott talked about. It's again a non-human, mostly it is a non-human attachment. Relating in fantasy, not only in action, but even in the fantasy, to animals or relating to non-human objects in one's fantasy. This can just be symbolization. It can also be intense human fear of human relating, fear so deep. Sorry. Sorry for that. So the fear of human relating can go so deep that in fantasy also The relating can be substituted partly by non-human relating or non-human attachments. Of course, all relating is not attachments. I mean, they are not relating is not synonymous to attachment. Of course, it's true. Sorry again. Uh, yeah, we were on point 9. In perversions, where eating non-edible products is involved, we see a strange kind of non-human attachment. We also see that in reverse in allergy, when anxiety related to somebody is put onto a food item, and I'm referring to psychologically generated allergy. Not to say all allergy is psychologically generated, but those which psychologically are generated, and I have personal experience of it. Because of a psychological event, I experienced food allergy for 20 years, and then after another psychological event, it just went out. All immunologists had told me it will never go across my life. It all went away. So I have a personal experience of this, that anxiety and rage and hatred related to a person can be put onto a food substance and develop an allergy. This is like phobia at a somatic level, or aggression at a somatic level, or hatred at a somatic level. So phobia and allergy are like reverse the negative aspects of what we are talking about. Hatred or negative attachments. If Beyond was there, he would use -a. Shopping during mania. When there is shopping going on in mania, it may just be the high, it may just be the cancellation of reality, or it may be filling up one's emptiness with products. And in that situation of mania, that particular situation of mania, the attachment to the objects is of a very different type. It's one of the examples of non-human attachment to fill up one's emptiness. There are fight over pets, there are fight over things, which are all examples of non-human attachments. And then there are memory products. A pen given by somebody, or a book given by somebody, or you give certain things to cherish when you leave the college or you leave the office. So these are all the memory products, the entire nostalgia industry, so to say. They are into the memory products. So we see this 12 as examples of non-human attachments which we deal with in psychotherapy in different ways. And they can come on a standalone basis, they can come in packages. But we definitely are dealing with non-human attachments and related issues in psychotherapy. The point is to recognize the significance of non-human attachment, accept it as natural, optimize the attachment portfolio by optimizing the proportion of human and non-human attachments, and use non-human attachments to stabilize the attachment portfolio, especially when human attachment part is empty or weak. It has to be, to some extent, it can be counterbalanced by non-human attachments. And therefore, it's not only that we find non-human attachment as a concept or as a phenomena, but it is a very strong tool for healing, which we can use, but we are not using. And this is one of the areas of great promise, how to use non-human attachments to help people heal themselves, enhance their well-being, and lead a better quality of life. Thank you.